Hello and welcome back to the Argyle HR Leadership Forum, Workforce Wellbeing, Retention, and Engagement. My name is Michael with Argyle. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our panel moderator. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. Now, to ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we will address your questions at the end of the session. And now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Elizabeth Hall, Vice President, Employee Experience with Cambia Health Solutions. We're excited to have Elizabeth and our panelists with us for a panel discussion titled DEI and Employee Wellbeing, Investing in Talent for Enterprise Success. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome, and over to you.
Michael, thank you. I did not realize there was an opportunity for prizes today. So lots of ways to stay engaged during our session. We hope that we will offer some compelling anecdotes, get you out of your inboxes and join us over here and join the conversation. We'd love to take your questions. We have a wonderful panel joining us today, actually from all across the country. I am in Bellevue, Washington, currently enjoying some beautiful liquid sunshine. I work for Cambia Health Solutions, which is a Blue Cross Blue Shield provider in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Utah. So first, we're going to have our panelists introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump into a very wide-ranging conversation on DEI, well-being, and employee experience. So Frida, can I ask you to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Thank you, Elizabeth. Hi, everyone. My name is Frida Green, and I'm a Senior Talent Acquisition Partner supporting equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging for RTI International. RTI International is a nonprofit research institute dedicated to improving the human condition.
That's great. Thank you. And my partner in the healthcare world, DJ, can I send it over to you next?
Absolutely. Thanks, Elizabeth. DJ Campbell. I'm Executive Director of Human Resources for Sanford Health, located in Bismarck, North Dakota. And we are a health system that spans 26 different states. So excited to be here. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. And Chantel, please introduce yourself and tell us about your professional background.
Sure. Thank you. I am the Director of Digital HR Experience for Baker Hughes. We are an energy technology company based in Houston, although currently I'm in Kansas City.
Great, thank you. And last but certainly not least, Vandy joining us today from Missoula, Montana.
Hi, glad to be here. My name's Vandy, and I am an HR consultant and Gallup Strengths Coach. I've worked in several industries, including aerospace, financial industry, and media and entertainment, and I'm really glad to be here.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And we also have several celebrities in our midst. At least two of our panelists have been extras on TV and film. Vandy, we're going to start with you. We found out in our pre-conference prep that you have been an extra on Yellowstone. So maybe if we have time at the end, you can share some of your experiences in chat. But let's get started on our topic. So our first question for you to consider is, how diversity, equity, inclusion, employee well-being, investing in talent have evolved over the very eventful past few years.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. I just really reflected on, I sort of broadened a few years to kind of think about diversity and inclusion really over the past, 20 years. And, I think the biggest shift, and I think we're still evolving, of course, but I think that the transition that I have seen the most is really going from, a focus of compliance, affirmative action, to representation, to ensuring that there's buy-in for DEI. I think we sort of have moved past that to where companies really do understand that taking a stand, on social injustice and really taking a good look at themselves in terms of, what are we doing to take a stand here? And then internally, what are we doing to address areas where we need to improve and grow as an organization? I think most organizations today really, the majority understand that, doing this is a true representation of who they are, their culture and their brand. I look back and, just a couple of examples of where I've seen growth here. When I started my career in manufacturing, I worked for a company that, really did want to increase representation in their workplace. But at that time, inclusion wasn't really a big part of it. And so I think a lot of the initiatives really fell short and weren't able to sustain themselves because we didn't have those tools at the time. So one of the things that we did was, we partnered with the UN to support refugees from Sudan. And, I really took that to heart and personally, was an advocate and taught them how to go to the grocery store, spent time with them and sort of bit my tongue when they would say, why are you driving? And why aren't you married? It was really a great personal growth to understand who, they were as individuals and their culture. At the same time, though, I had a very difficult time because my own skill set wasn't there and we just didn't have the tools on inclusion. So when it came to really fostering a sense of belonging and supporting, their career growth, unfortunately, we fell short. So it just really became, well, they have the skill set, in production and quality. And that skill set really, quite frankly, was a survival skill set. And we really should have been looking at the broader picture of, how do we overall support their success. And so, later other companies did, and many of them have gone on to get PhDs and, are leaders in organizations. And so I'm to see that. But at that time, I think that's a big example where company had focused on, the diversity, but not with the inclusion. And we lost because of that. We lost great talent. And I would say the biggest change I've also seen recently is that, we now, this question also involves well-being. In the last 3 years, 3 or 4 years, I think, we now know, from a science perspective, based on Dr. Eisenberger's work, she was able to look at fMRIs and see that exclusion and isolation, they have the same impact on the brain that physical pain has. And if you think about that as an organization, that says a lot in terms of, what does engagement really mean? And the attachment and correlation of belonging and inclusion to both performance and engagement. So one way at the credit union at TDCU, we did measure engagement, we measured belonging, and we also equipped, our managers to coach teams on, how to co-create, what was relevant to the team in terms of belonging initiatives, but also how to talk to them about, their well-being in a way that they felt comfortable, but was also very supportive. So those are some examples of at least what I've seen, over the years. I maybe went back a little bit too far though.
It's all
So
good.
sorry about that.
And thank you for sharing your own personal journey, because that is an important aspect of any work around DEI, as we need to do our own work as leaders so we can help our organization. So thank you very much for sharing that.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
Yeah, DJ, we were talking as we were preparing for this panel about COVID, and certainly at Stanford Health, you have seen the impacts of that and how you're approaching well-being with your employee population. So what do you want to add about that?
Yeah, first of all, Vandy, great. I loved what you said there. And what really resonated with me was when you said isolation and exclusion. That's the same, people, so neurologically, we see that just like pain, physical pain. Unfortunately, we don't always treat it like that though. So if I had a cut or I got a fractured leg, I'd go to the doctor right away. We don't always understand when we are feeling from a mental or behavioral standpoint, feeling that pain and how we can go through and we can treat that. Working in a hospital, I have the opportunity, I get to work with lots of, behavioral health and mental health professionals every day. During COVID, that was a really, really difficult time for a lot of our frontline staff. And we actually brought on a therapist. So that individual came in 1 day a week from 8 to 5, and people could sign up for hour or half-hour sessions. And we thought, wow, this is going to be a great benefit. People are going to like, and people did like it, but nobody used it. And a lot of that was because there's a stigma around it. If I need help, that's people are going to look at me a certain way. And we understood that, and we talked to a lot of our employees, and we ended up creating some videos with one of our therapists, psychologist here, some videos, so 3-4 minute videos that people could watch to help them really understand. When we think of mental health, we think of a serious mental health issue. We all suffer from some level of mental health at some point in our lives. So anxiety, depression, just feeling low, just not feeling okay. And so being able to share those videos and helping people really just self-identify and making it okay. I can't tell you that we're all the way there. It's still definitely a work in progress, because I think there's just such a stigma there. But I think that we're well on our way to creating a pathway, at least for those individuals, to make sure that they're okay.
That's wonderful. And you're reminding me that at Cambia, we observed Mental Health Awareness Month with a series of employee videos of employees offering their own testimonials about their mental health journeys and what they struggle with. And I think we are slowly trying to work against that stigma so that we can talk about it more in an organization. And certainly for our business, we want to make sure that we have a very strong behavioral health network for our members, which is not easy to do these days when we have a shortage of those kinds of providers. DJ, I also want to talk with you a little bit more about reskilling and upskilling and the kinds of opportunities that you're providing for employees at Sanford to really keep their skills fresh as our labor market continues to evolve.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I don't think any of us are workforce is such a huge issue right now, just across the nation and probably across the world. And so we've really had to really look at our workforce right now and figure out how are we going to create the workforce of tomorrow, utilizing the people that we have today. Because the reality is there's not a lot of people that are going to come into the workforce in the next 10 years. We got the opportunity through COVID to really create some reskilling platforms. So understanding that some of our administrative folks weren't going to be able to be utilized during COVID as much as some of our frontline staff. And so we were able to train some of those skills and create some prototypes, which we've now created a number of other opportunities for people to go in, reskill, and then do some type of a rotation within that department to see if it's something that they like and it's going to be a good fit for them long term. I think this is also a really great opportunity. We talk about upskilling and reskilling to really engage the community. Those university partners, they're going through the same thing that we are when it comes to workforce. They need students, they want to help. But I think that we, as industry professionals, we have to reach out to them to really leverage what they can provide us. Not everybody needs a 4-year degree today. You can go in, you can get a certificate, or you can create a pathway where it can really lead from somebody who's a certified nursing assistant all the way up to an executive director. And so those are opportunities that we don't always look at, but I think that understanding that the next however long, I'm not a psychic, but I know it's going to be a long time before our workforce shortages come back. Reimagining what that's going to look like. You think of investments in a business right now, and more than ever, people are our biggest investment. They're our hugest asset, and we have to begin to invest like we would in a building to maintain that, or in a car, or anything that you would utilize as an asset. I think last but not least, I'll touch on is just through that DE&I lens and how many non-traditional pathways we can create to help individuals. I think there's so many times we look for what we've done before and what's easy, but there's going to be so many pathways that we can create for individuals that wouldn't have that opportunity. And so I would just really encourage everybody to go and think outside of the box. Take somebody who doesn't work in HR and say, hey, I need to get person X to person, from X to Z here. How would you do that? Because they have the answers. We just have to be brave enough to ask the questions.
That's great. I love that perspective. And that's inclusion in action, both asking that question, getting curious, and then creating the pathways for people with all different kinds of backgrounds to have a great career. Chantel, you're looking at the same thing, but through a skills lens. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Our organization is looking at that whole journey as well, from onboarding to career growth and development, and piloting a software that will have some AI in it and taking in a lot of the different skills data from across the entire ecosystem in the world wide web, to help figure out from the onboarding stage, whether that's somebody, a candidate and a recruitment for our talent acquisition teams, and looking at the skills that come in on a resume and how they may be a fit or not, or what the gaps are in skills there, to an existing employee, and maybe they want to get to the next role or have even an interest or a career interest that may be different from where they're at today, and taking all of that data and being able to more intelligently recommend the different, where the gaps are, and where they can connect and fill those gaps through other areas of our ecosystem, like in our learning groups and things like that. So it's really, I think, useful in a lot of different ways. And we know it'll take some refinement, but to be able to get those insights in an intelligent way, and that an employee can also use as it's connected to their profile, and they can also augment that and update it based on their own interests or their own skills that they may see. And there's validation and stuff, of course, that we're testing along with that, but it can become a really powerful tool, I think, to support those types of processes.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I know at Baker Hughes, you've really been making some additional investments in digital learning and development, perhaps in concert with the work you're doing around skills. Can you tell us more about that too?
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, everybody, when COVID hit, was thinking about virtual development at that point in time. And so, you can't avoid the fact that some of that was spurred from that, as with everyone. Prior to Baker, I was with GE for about 10 years, creating a learning experience platform, which really was focused on the consumer type of experience. And going into Baker Hughes used to be a part of GE. And so as it got divested, not only was COVID part of that equation, but also us starting over as a company was part of that. And so with the lack of a lot of the right ecosystem tools and platforms and resources, even in our employees, and the restructuring of the company, so many things, on top of COVID, there was some innovation that happened in our organization to create communities that there's a couple of them today. So one of them is for all employees. It's focused on the Baker Hughes values, and it is a blended experience, but there's various elements of that take in some of these engagement and employee experience principles to really make it different and effective. And some of that includes things, we have launched a badging initiative with Credly, which is really useful, but we don't require anybody to complete a certain thing by a certain time. This isn't compliance training. We have these resources and the community engaged with each other, and really thinking more like from a communications and a marketing standpoint, to try to find out what's the best way to keep people engaged and interested, whether it's because it's the badging and a gamification component, or because we're approaching things in a more modern way with our marketing campaigns, and how do we actually interact with people in a way that's not just, hey, you've been assigned this. And leaning on kind of the ambassador models and brand equity and how people share things with each other in the external world, we lean a lot on that. The other piece is, how do you present to the organization why that's impactful? And we focus on a model that's based on return on engagement, or return on experience and engagement. It could be ROE or ROX versus ROI, especially in the learning world, where there's often not a direct correlation between, we did X thing and we now saved the company this much money. So looking at some of those things, and again, we don't have a lot of the intelligent platforms and tools when we started this. So leveraging things like Power BI and having a team that is really curious and learning, how do you connect reports together, or how do you connect a simple Microsoft form to a Workday report, and then get insights from the activities that are happening and build that into the experience, so that not only are you making it better for the learners or for the employees in what's going on, but also for your people who are running it and your admins, and how they can actually report back the impact of these things in an intelligent way. And all those types of things that can be measured. I mean, we could talk about that in a whole other session, but just having that interest and education of the organization on those types of things, I think has come really into the importance of experience and engagement, because without your employees and without their commitment to the company and their feelings of growing and having a community, there's definitely an impact to the company revenue. It's just a matter of, are you tracking that or not?
That's great. Thank you. I love the way you think about metrics and capturing some of those learning and development measures that can be elusive. We have a question in the chat around mentoring and development, particularly assignments that might encourage some cross-departmental learning. Are any of you engaging in any of that type of work in your organizations that you could share?
I can share that, at TDCU, part of our leadership program was to do cross-functional training, including, if you're early career or even, at a later stage in leadership, making sure that, you're learning what it means to do collections, getting, those roles, especially that are closer to the customer, doing, cross-functional training there. But then also on the other side, having opportunity for employees to engage in key experiences that would help develop them, such as, leading a component of an M&A, or, developing a presentation, that is like cost benefit analysis. So there are certain key experiences that we identified were very important in your growth as a leader. Whether that was people leadership or operational leadership. And so those were identified. We had a playbook, and managers were able to incorporate that at all levels in the organization.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I would imagine, Chantel, that the kind of skills database that you're building could help identify people for some of those assignments as well, as the database grows over time.
Exactly. Yeah, that is an intent for sure. And then there's also some ways too that we're working within kind of our blended models to allow people to volunteer for these types of things. And as part of that connection with each other, to kind of self-serve in finding others, just being able to find other people and connect that way as well, for sure.
That's great.
Yeah, well, I wish we had that.
Yeah.
That piece of it.
You might get some follow-up calls, Chantel. Well, speaking of finding people, Frida, let's shift to the world of talent acquisition, and let's talk about what some of the best practices are right now, and particularly what you're doing at RTI to find, hire, and retain diverse candidates.
Absolutely. So I think the first thing I want to talk about is really building that strong foundation before you even get into the sourcing. So really making sure that you're assessing the diversity landscape at your organization is really key. You really want to, before you can really implement a successful recruitment plan, you have to start with understanding where your organization is in terms of diversity. So, what underdeserved communities do you want to attract? Do you have any trouble retaining certain groups of individuals? Those are the things that you want to look at first before you even move into that sourcing strategy. You also want to look at your employment brand. Is it going to resonate with those underrepresented groups that you want to attract? And making sure that you're building that into your communication messages before you even go out there looking for the talent. That's going to be key. So for example, if you were going to recruit at an HBCU, you really want to make sure that you're creating that employer brand that resonates with individuals from those universities, whether it's HBCUs or MSIs or tribal universities. That's going to be very, very key. Some of the things that we're doing to build that strong foundation at RTI, we launched a course, Undermining Bias in Hiring, really focusing on the biases that we bring to the interview hiring process, the interview process specifically. We want to make sure that individuals are aware of those things so that we can combat that once we have identified those candidates. We don't want them to, we don't want to derail that process at the interview stage. We also have implemented a structured interview process that's competency-based. We want to make sure that everybody that we've identified in that sourcing process is going through the same process, so we can really truly assess them equally there. So those are a few of the things that we've done. And then when we talk about really sourcing for candidates, again, that brand awareness is key. We've launched an HBCU, historically Black colleges and universities initiative, where we are really intentional about partnering with those universities, not us just kind of speaking to them, preaching to them. We want to hear what they want, what their leaders are looking for to partner with industry, to partner in industry. And so some of the things that we are doing, events, open house events, where we can really showcase who we are as an organization, what we stand for, the types of opportunities. They get to talk to some of our experts. Those are the things that we are doing to really build that pipeline of diverse candidates. And that could be from HBCUs or professional associations, specifically to underrepresented groups. So those are just some of the things that, we've initiated, and we're planning to launch some of those things in the new year. We're really excited about that. Another thing that you all can do is leverage, if you have employee resource groups, really leverage those groups within your organization for referrals. And that's something that we do quite frequently, is really leverage those groups to help us tap into those networks of individuals. So those are just a few of the key things that I think you all can implement at your organizations as well. And they've been really, really successful for us.
That's great. And, at Cambia, we take full advantage of employees who raise their hands and are members of those employee resource groups and want to do more. Some have participated in job fairs. Of course, we have some active mentoring programs. And then we want to continue to make sure that our newly hired employees feel very welcome in those employee resource groups and have them as part of their onboarding process. Is there anything special that you're doing at RTI related to onboarding, or frankly, any of the rest of you around onboarding?
So we just had some discussions around that and how we want to really revamp our onboarding process so that it's, so we look at things like we have, the buddy system, things of that nature that we leverage currently. And so we're looking at really revamping some of those things that we're doing to refresh it in the new year.
That's fantastic. Great. Thank you for sharing. Appreciate it. Well, let's talk about, continuing our theme of some of the changes in the past few years. There's been a lot of media buzzwords lately around the Great Resignation and quiet quitting and, fill in the blank, other things that you can read in any of our media outlets. So, DJ, how do you think about motivating employees in that kind of environment?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and I think that it's one that's plaguing probably every business and in every industry right now. Is how do we retain that workforce, and how do we ensure that they're engaged and excited about working for your organization? In my experience, I think the number one thing for motivating or engaging an employee is really the leader. It comes down to that individual who that employee is going to look to for guidance, for career growth, for help in any of those situations. And I think one area that I've just noticed people are really struggling with is how do you lead with empathy, but then hold the individual accountable at the same time? And I think leaders right now are really struggling with that, especially because we've switched over to such a remote workforce. And we think because we can't see them, that it's really that, they're not there, and we can't hold them accountable. But I think it's really comes down, I'll just give you just an easy example of empathy and play and how you can really help somebody. I have a person on my team and she's got small children. And so it was the first day of school, and that's a big day. My kids are older. So my day is get up early, try to get them out of bed. And then, they don't want to take pictures. They just leave, and then they'll be back at the end of the day to eat. This was her kindergartner's first day, and I blindly had scheduled a meeting at 8 o'clock that morning with her, not thinking. And so 3 days before, I called her up. I'm like, hey, I'm pretty sure you probably need to take your kids to school. And she's like, yeah, but it's okay. And I'm like, no, you need to take the morning off. You need to go take your kids to school. Don't, it's fine. We can figure out the work part later. It's that understanding of where it's meeting your employees where they're at, and then figuring out what motivates them. Because it's not always growth, and it's very rarely money. What motivates an individual a lot of times is their well-being and their work-life balance. And so really having that trust factor with your employees or the team that you're leading, we're going to see a very large shift from the managers of yesterday to the leaders of today, and how we facilitate that shift within your organization. I think that's where you're going to see where most of the workforce are going to gravitate to those organizations. I think another important thing is just understanding your employee population. So any type of survey that you can get out there, and we've talked a little bit about some digital platforms. There's tons of them out there, and the more engaging platform that you can find, the better. But also then taking action. So there's nothing worse than asking somebody what they want and then just setting it down and forgetting about it forever. You've got to take action on the things that you need to do to really motivate and engage that employment workforce.
Great.
Yeah.
Please,
sorry,
Chantel,
I was just
jump in.
going to add, yeah, to that. I think DJ, you touched on a few things, and I would also tie that back to some of the earlier topics. So I think one you just mentioned at the end there is employee listening for sure. And what you do with that, I think that's great, a part of engagement. And then also, I think when you talk about your recruiting and your hiring, it's not, and then as we talk about skills, it's not only about the skills also, you could consider it a skill, but also I think the type of how the team members are going to mesh together is really critical. And the best teams that I've been on have been teams that everybody, you know, can respect each other, have the constructive conflict, but they also are just on the same wavelength. And I think that's really hard to do because it's not just about skills. As a recruiter or as a hiring manager, you kind of have to have, I think, a sense and a gut feeling for, to your point, DJ, like, how is your team today? And also what kind of person can fit in there? And also what you may not want to continue tolerating from a team if there are people who are detracting from the culture that you have there. So I think when we talk about quiet quitting and why do people stay and stuff like that, you have to consider some of those too, because when you talk about somebody who's committed to having a meeting, even though they have something important, that can also be not only is the leader that it's impacting, but it's if they feel like they have to pick up the slack because they don't have a team that's supportive or things like that, and they're just stretching themselves too far, I think. So just another thing to consider on those items.
Yeah, that's a great point of really thinking about how critical it is for leaders to be empathetic and meet everyone where they are. And in order to do that, you have to know your people and really spend time getting to know them. Frida, I see we have a question from one of our participants, you know, saying, gosh, we're really struggling about how to attract a more diverse set of candidates. Any recommendations or free consulting that you can offer today about how they could approach that?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm gonna go back to really that employer brand and building in that diversity element to your your employer brand, your messaging on your website. You want to showcase, your diverse employees, your current diverse employees. Let them give testimonials. One of the things that we did recently at RTI was our RTI Belong campaign, where we featured members of our ERGs, and they really gave, authentic testimonies about how those ERGs have been helpful for them in terms of well-being and just really fitting into the organization and feeling that sense of belonging. So if you have people that you can spotlight in your organization to show the diversity that you have currently, that is one thing that you can do. And I know someone mentioned that they don't have ERGs. That's okay. Just, highlight or feature the individuals that you do have at your organization to talk about your culture and those types of things. I think that's one big thing that you can do to help to attract diverse candidates to your organization, and really focus in on any DE&I initiatives that you may be spearheading at your organization as well. That's really important. And underrepresented individuals really do look for that type of communication on the websites and things of that nature.
That's great. Thank you. And it's not easy to get started, and certainly not easy to attract candidates in this very unusual labor market we have right now. We also have a question from the audience about getting started with ERGs and recognizing that not every organization has them, and it can be hard to know how to jump into the fray. I'll just offer a couple thoughts from Cambia and then turn it over to our panel and see what ideas you might have. So I think it's helpful to have some interested individuals first. whether they are employees or potential executive sponsors who are willing to raise their hands and do some extra work so that this is not purely an HR initiative. In the spirit of inclusion, you want to make sure that you are casting your net widely as people participate in the founding of ERGs. I also think it's particularly helpful if you can tie that to an existing initiative in your organization. So not just we want to be diverse and we're going to have people connect with each other in fresh ways, but also, gosh, we're working in a hybrid environment. We want to help people stay connected, or we're onboarding a new class of customer service representatives and we want to give them some opportunities to connect. So look for something that is particularly tied to your business and your business model that can help those ERGs be very grounded in the mission of your organization. Panelists, any other ideas about getting started with ERGs or any advice that you would have?
I think one thing I would just recommend is, making sure that you are clear about, the purpose and the charter, and so that you have clarity around, where the group can have, leverage the most, change and focus on initiatives. I think you said earlier, kind of aligning it to the organization. I think that's important. I've also seen an organization where they have combined their ERGs with advisory boards, like with the community. And I think that's really very helpful because you get this really nice dialogue, from customers and employees around DEI. So.
That's great. That's great. We also have clubs at Cambia. I don't know if any of your organizations have clubs, but that's another nice way for employees to get connected. We have a history club, a hiking club, a gardening club, and these clubs meet remotely. They are not necessarily tied to things online, but another nice way that we've been connecting our hybrid workforce. Well, let me turn back to you, Vandy, and talk a little bit more about, equal opportunity. I saw we had a question from one of our participants about how all of this work around DEI, well-being, employee experience accrues to a more productive organization. So could you speak a little bit to that and what kinds of overall results we see around productivity and company culture?
Sure. Well, I can speak to, the impact that it can have on, engagement for sure. When you have, a workforce where the employees feel empowered, where we're focusing on their strengths versus focusing on their weaknesses, where they can be authentic, and where you've really got leaders that are really coaches. They're guiding by the side versus the former kind of command and control. I think that just changes the whole environment in terms of trust and openness and that sense of belonging, which we kind of go back to the earlier part of, are you in a culture that's fear-based, or are you in a culture that really is empowering trust so that people can be their authentic self? And when that happens, you have higher engagement, both for employees and for customers. So, part of the initial question too was to kind of look at, where do you go from here when you've made a lot of progress in your DEI initiatives. I think, it's ongoing, but, supporting employees through various, life cycles, career stages. DJ talked earlier about, partnering with universities. And I think that is going to be so important with the labor shortage and so many women that have exited the workforce with the increased demand, and caregiving. And unfortunately, that is still predominantly on the shoulders of women, and it's not just their children, but also their parents. And so we have to understand why we're missing so many women, why we lost so many women, and what can we do to change that. So that might be looking at your redefining your job descriptions. It might be looking at, partnering with a university to come up with a certification or a skills-based program, that sort of thing. Or it could be looking at, things that you need to change internally to support more career growth and mobility. Maybe broadening your compensation bands so you're not, perhaps reinforcing bias and discrimination. You're broadening those experiences and helping foster more diversity and representation across various professions.
That's great. And I really like how you're thinking about that leading edge around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I also think it's really helpful to understand the metrics in your organization, sort of who's coming into the organization, who's being promoted, who's exiting the organization, who's experienced that kind of lateral career growth in the organization, and really having a handle on those metrics will help you understand where you might have an opportunity for an intervention.
I want to jump on that really quick because there's another metric that I think is really important, and that is your referrals. And so for a long time, we've said, hey, the target, I think even SHRM says 25% is a good representation of your brand. But one thing we have to keep in mind in that is that, some of those practices that they can, reinforce, systemic, racism and discrimination based on, that similar to me network. And so I think really ensuring, earlier we were talking about the training, just the easy training on, bias and mitigating that leaders need to be very mindful of in all stages of employees' careers, including referrals.
That's great. Yes, thank you. We have to be very careful about how we're cultivating those internal networks.
Yes.
We have just a few more minutes, so let me throw it open to the rest of the panel, to Chantel, Frida, and DJ. Any kind of parting thoughts that you want to offer as we think about the connections between DEI, well-being, and employee experience?
I'll go first. I'll just say, I think when it comes to all of those, it really comes down to innovation and beginning to think differently about how we solve some of the problems that we're facing now and we're going to continue to face in the future. Vandy brought up, women leaving the workforce. Childcare really does come on them quite a bit. How can we create, a 4 to 8 in the evening job for somebody to do remotely when it's convenient for them, that's part-time, that, those are things we have to begin to think about, that not everything's going to fit into our traditional way that we've done work in the past, because we're not going to have as many people to work with. So I just think the more innovative, and I think to be innovative, we've got to listen. And we've got to take down some of those walls that stop us and create those barriers for thinking differently.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. I think really self-awareness is key to this as well. Even things like when we are creating digital resources for employees, it's challenging your own assumptions with things even like, okay, we want to put an image of something, but a screen reader can't pick up, the text in an image. So how can we make sure that we're being inclusive and making sure that if somebody's using a screen reader, that they'll be able to get the same information as somebody who may not be. And then similarly, even when we're talking about diversity and we just need to put a stock image somewhere, being really mindful of what is represented in a stock image. And are you making sure that you're finding something and that is diverse? You're not always portraying the same type of employee, to Frida's point about the brand. So there's a lot of things that I think for a long time have just been the way that it is, and how people just set by second nature, let me just take an image or share this. But being more mindful of the true diversity of what your employee workforce is, I think will really help you kind of see where your blind spots are.
That's great. Thank you. Frida.
And if I can add quickly, I'll just add on to a little bit of what Chantel was saying, really that authenticity of the brand. So if you're not there yet, we're a work in progress. So just be honest about that. Show the true authenticity of your organization. I think that speaks volumes for underrepresented individuals.
That's great. Well, work in progress might be the perfect theme for all of our journeys on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you so much to all of you who joined us today, and a very special thank you to Chantel, Vandy, Frida, and DJ for joining us and sharing their wealth of experience. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to all of our panelists. This was a wonderful panel discussion. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today for this fantastic session. Now, this session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. This officially concludes the Argyle HR Leadership Forum, Workforce Wellbeing, Retention, and Engagement. We'd like to thank our sponsor, DEI, and thank you again for joining us today and engaging in our content. Have a great rest of your day. Elizabeth and the rest of the panels, thank you so much.